abilities, I speak truth to power without fear. So, as many of you know, I'm a co founder of the book club Reading as Activism. I want to encourage you all to like our Facebook page and to follow us on Instagram. So, today we discuss this book right here, Assata. And it's a book written by Assata Shakur about her life and her experiences. Many people noted Assata Shakur is a black revolutionary. She was a member of the Black Panther Party. Later, she became a member of the Black Liberation Army. And she was at one point convicted of allegedly killing a New Jersey state trooper. And she was sentenced to several years in jail. Now, she managed to liberate herself from jail. She fled to Cuba. She was granted political asylum in Cuba, and she continues to live in Cuba today. And there are people still calling for her to be arrested and brought back to the United States and to serve out her time in jail. Now, what I want to do is just highlight some key points that were raised in this particular book. Again, I encourage people to read this book. It's a powerful book. It's a very engaging book. It is a compelling book, and it will keep you focused throughout the book. You know, some books like this, uh, dealing with these types of heavy issues may be boring for some, but this is an engaging book. It's a thriller, even though it's about real life situations. Um, so I encourage you all to read it. You know, it's an easy read. I read it in a couple of days. And this book talks about some very important issues. One of the biggest issues that stands out in this book is this concept of black self hatred. You know, she talks about how, uh, you know, African Americans deal with colorism issues. You know, she talked about, like, the terms that we use to degrade each other. She was talking about how the term black was a term of insult. It was considered an insult to call somebody black back in the day. She talked about how when she was growing up, they didn't have slogans such as black is beautiful or any of that kind of stuff. Black was literally used as an insult. She also talked about hair. Like, hair is a big issue that black women and black people, period, deal with. She went into the whole politics of hair, talked about the pressure for black women to either straighten their hair or to wear wigs and all that kind of stuff, and just about how damaging it is to the psyche of a people to think that they have to change who they are in order to fit in a society. And she briefly talked about interracial relationships. She talked about black men, for instance, in the village in New York, how a lot of them preferred to date white women. And they had that preference based on a whole bunch of negative stereotypes about black women, you know, stereotypes of black women as argumentative, as problematic, as difficult to deal with. A lot of these types of stereotypes that you still hear today. So that's an issue that she talks about in this book. And then she also, throughout the book, talks about her views about the police. She refers to the police as pigs throughout this book. And she also talks about how the police were essentially like occupied armies in black communities, meaning that a lot of these police officers didn't live in the community, they were not of the community, and in fact, many of them, or most of them at that particular time, were white. So, in a sense, they were like an occupying army, and they weren't there to protect and serve the people. Too often, they were there to harass and abuse the people, to brutalize the people and stuff. So, she talked about that. And during our discussion, we talked about how, like, it's really a shame that here we are all these years after she wrote this book, all these years after the Black Panther Party, uh, and we're still grappling with a lot of the same issues, these issues of police brutality. You got a movement called Black Lives Matter. You know, you got people talking about how Black Lives Matter. You have examples such as George Floyd, where a police officer literally put his knee on this brother's neck for over 8 minutes while this brother cried out and pleaded for his life, cried out to his mother. You know, we have the examples of Eric Garner, you know, being choked to death live on camera before the whole world and the officer not being charged. We have the example of Philando Castile, a brother shot by a police officer. So we have countless examples of police brutality that continue today. Many examples, and those are just a few. You know, it's just a shame that despite all these steps towards progress, we still have a long way to go when it comes to the question of police brutality. Every other day, there's another black man or black woman killed by the police. There's a new hashtag, a new cry for justice. So it's just a shame that despite, you know, some progress, we are still dealing with this issue of police brutality. And, you know, I think that I understand why she would call police officers pigs. Like, I completely understand, given, you know, the fact that they disproportionately target and kill black people on a regular basis, given the fact that black people, even today, are traumatized by these images that we constantly see, whether these are images captured by uh, bystanders on their cell phones or these are images captured on police body cameras. We're constantly bombarded with these images of police brutality. And when you have a system where you have police officers regularly brutalizing black people and killing black people, and too often they get away with it, it's understandable why people will refer to police officers as pigs. And you've heard me say that as well. Like, any person that would do what those officers did to George Floyd, that officer is a pig. Any officer that would do what they did to Eric Garner, you know, choking that brother out to death, that's a pig. Or the brother that got shot in the back, Walter Scott, in South Carolina, an unarmed brother shot in the back multiple times by a police officer. Those officers are behaving like pigs. So that title is appropriate. So that's one thing that is addressed in this particular book. The other thing is the whole concept of revolution versus reform. You know, she raises the question about whether or not we can affect change within this system, whether or not it's a need for revolution, you know, revolutionary change. Those are some of the themes that she talks about in this book. She talks about the similarities between Republicans and Democrats. So I'm really interested, for those of you who've read this book, like, I want to know, what do you think about this book? What are your thoughts about these particular issues? Another thing that she raises in this book, you know, is, you know, she raises a lot of issues. Another issue that she raises is, you know, this issue of integration and whether or not it's the best thing for black people. You know, because basically she compared integrated schools to segregated schools. And she saw the benefits in both. For instance, she talked about how in the segregated schools, the teachers were more concerned with the students. Like, the black teachers identified with the students, they cared about the students. But she also talked about how in those segregated schools, they lacked various resources. They were denied resources that other schools received. And as a result, black students didn't receive the same level of education as students that went to white schools and all that kind of stuff. But on the other hand, with respect to the integrated schools, she talked about how a lot of times the teachers were indifferent to black students. And we see that in a lot of integrated schools today, there's still a lot of problems. You know, black students, for instance, being tracked to remedial courses or not given an opportunity to take you know, advanced courses. You know, problems with discipline where black students are unfairly and more harshly subjected to discipline compared to white students and other students. So she raises very interesting questions. And for me, like one of the most compelling parts of this book was a point where her daughter comes to visit her. You know, her daughter comes to the prison where she's locked up. The daughter comes there to visit her mom. And Assata Shakur tries to comfort her daughter. She tries to play games with her, tries to be silly and have fun with her. But her daughter is distant. Her daughter is not responding to, you know, this effort to reach out and to have fun with her. Instead, her daughter eventually gets mad at her mom and proceeds to hit her with her fist and, you know, punch her and, you know, try to hit her. But her daughter is young, just bear that in mind. I think her daughter was like 4 or something like that, real young. And she was basically lashing out because she was mad at her mom because she didn't understand why her mother couldn't come with her, why her mother couldn't leave the jail. She didn't understand that her mother was locked up and she couldn't get out. So she lashed out at her mom. And she basically told her, "You're not my mother. You know, you don't want to come out. You want to stay here," and all that kind of stuff. And Assata Shakur talks about how after that, she went back to her cell and cried to the point where she started to vomit. And then at that moment, she knew that she could no longer be in that prison and that she had to be free. And she eventually liberated herself from jail. And, you know, that's one of the points that we were talking about during our discussion is like, you know, a lot of us are curious, like we want to know how she got out of jail and all that stuff. But in order for her to describe that, she probably would have incriminated those people that helped her get away and all that kind of stuff. So it's understandable why she did not, you know, reveal how she got away and all that kind of stuff. Another thing that's very important for people to understand is just like the role of government, you know, in terms of the counterintelligence program, monitoring activists, you know, putting them under surveillance and engaging in all kinds of tactics to neutralize black organizations and black leaders, including, you know, promoting violence between members and stuff like that, destroying leaders, assassinating leaders, putting trumped up charges on leaders and members of various organizations that were trying to make a difference in the community. You know, in this book, she talks about how she joined the Black Panther Party and how the Black Panther Party started to erode as a result of the counterintelligence program. She talked about inner conflicts within the Black Panther Party. She was based in New York, and many of the people that she was affiliated with and that she loved and cared about were a part of the Panther 21 in New York. These are people who were, you know, faced some trumped up charges for some kind of conspiracy. You know, so they were arrested by the government. You know, they went to trial and they were acquitted. And there were tensions between that 21 and the national office of the Black Panther Party. And because of those tensions, the, you know, the leadership of the National Black Panther Party expelled those members of the New York 21, you know, members of the New York branch of the Black Panther Party. And those were her friends. She identified with them. And that was one of the last straws, and that was one of the reasons why she left the Black Panther Party. And then, you know, after she left the Black Panther Party, you know, she eventually had to go underground because the police were after her. You know, the first thing that tipped her off was, you know, people told her, "Hey, don't go home. The police are all over there looking for you," and stuff like that. So that was the first thing. And then another thing, you know, some officers got shot. There was some kind of shootout. And, there was an article put out in the newspaper basically saying that she was wanted for questioning and all that kind of stuff. She was a person of interest. So after that, she went underground. And the reason why she would go underground is because people had no faith in the political system. They had no reason to have faith in the court system and stuff like that. When people were being set up with all kinds of trumped up charges around the country at that particular time. So, those are some of the issues that are raised in this book. One thing that I wanted to talk about is like this whole concept of socialism. That's a big issue that she raises in this book. She talks about capitalism as exploitive, as oppressive, as a source of imperialism, and she talked about the role of socialism and how socialism has been demonized in the media. That's another thing she talks about is the role of media in shaping public opinion, and in fact, making people see her as some kind of terrorist and all that kind of stuff. And as far as I'm concerned, like Assata Shakur is actually a modern day Harriet Tubman, like somebody who was fighting for the freedom of black people. Somebody that wasn't just about talking about things, but she was actually out there putting in the work for black people. Actually, engaged in all kinds of things. First with the Black Panther Party, helping to feed the children, take care of children, you know, promote a lot of survival programs of the Black Panther Party. So yeah, I mean, it's just something else. I mean, I encourage you all to read this book if you have not read it before. Another thing that's very interesting about this book is just the role of Cuba in this book. Like, first of all, Cuba gave this sister political asylum. That's something. And then also they talk about how Cuba was is a revolutionary society, a socialist society. They deal with the question of race and racism in Cuba. They talk about like, certain things that Cubans have, despite the fact that they have less resources than America, less wealth than America. They still manage to provide their citizens with free health care, with free education. All the things that people need are provided by the government. They also talked about how, uh, Cuba has really done a lot as far as race relations is concerned, in terms of addressing the problem of racism. Of course, they haven't solved the problem of racism. I think it'll be overly idealistic to suggest that there is no racism in Cuba. And in fact, she talks about that in the book. She talked about this one man who actually was, this guy that was Cuban, who actually went to Angola to fight to help liberate African countries, to help fight imperialist forces over there in support of Africans. But when this person got back to Cuba, this person still harbored, views that would be considered racist. Like he didn't want his daughter to marry a black man and stuff, despite the fact that this particular man had been engaged in the struggle to help African people and stuff like that. He still harbored, deep-seated racist type of views towards black people. Um, and, that's an issue that he was struggling with. So that goes to show you that even the most progressive person, the most quote unquote revolutionary person in a quote unquote revolutionary society can still harbor racist views. And that brings me to another point that's raised in this book, and that's the role of allies. Throughout this book, she talks about how the Panthers and other groups worked with white allies, and then not just only white allies, but other groups of people like Asians, uh, Hispanics, and all that kind of stuff. They formed broad-based coalitions, and that's something that's very important in any kind of social justice work, in any kind of progressive work. If you are really about trying to bring about fundamental change in society, you need to have coalitions. This go it alone mentality that you hear a lot on YouTube is not revolutionary. It's counter revolutionary. It's not an ideology that will benefit people in terms of organizing. People that are serious about organizing to make a difference in society understand the importance of forming coalitions with like minded individuals. These people who are on here to entertain you and to sell you products to stack up their paper so that they can live in mansions and all that kind of stuff. They had a luxury of telling people that, coalitions don't matter. They had a luxury of demonizing and attacking other groups of people and all that kind of stuff. And that brings me to a point that she raised about immigrants. And this is a point that I wish we had time to discuss. She talked about how immigrants, like, even if they're a black immigrant or whatever, immigrant of color, they still are preferred in this society over African Americans. She talked about how, there was this segregated amusement park. I think it was in the South. Yeah, it was in the South. And, her mother, I think it was her grandmother or mother, tried to go to this amusement park, tried to take her to this amusement park so she could enjoy herself just like any other kid. And they were told that she couldn't go to the amusement park because she was, because they were black and all that kind of stuff. So the mother pretended like she was from a Latin American country or Hispanic country, and she was speaking in Spanish and stuff like that. And she was telling them if they didn't let her in, she would call the embassy and all that kind of stuff and report them for treating, a foreign national in this discriminatory way. And eventually they decided to avoid the trouble, we'll just let these black people in. And she was just pointing out how foreign blacks in a lot of ways are treated better than native born African Americans. And I think there's something to that, and I think that that's something worthy of discussion. Yeah, so those are some of the points that were raised in this book. I highly recommend this book. It's a great historical piece. And one last thing that I want to address is just like some of the lessons that are learned from this book, like some of the lessons learned from Assata's example and from the Black Panther Party. There are many lessons to be learned. Like, in fact, a lot of the groups today recite Assata Shakur in their protests. Like, they have rallying cries that they use directly from Assata Shakur when she talks about how we have a duty to fight, when she talks about how we have nothing to lose but our chains. Those types of slogans are slogans that are used today in the movement. Another thing that this made me think about is like, this whole concept of armed struggle and whether or not armed struggle is a viable means to bring about change in this society. We saw what happened with the Black Panther Party. They were destroyed. They were, the organization was destroyed. Many members were locked up. Some of them are still in jail today. Some of them were recently, every now and then you hear about one that was released recently after serving decades behind bars. So it's a lot, like, so that's one thing, like, and then just like the mistrust, like that's another thing that, that I mentioned earlier, just like how, the FBI was able to get people to fight with one another. People that worked together at one point, having them feuding and fighting with each other. That's one of the things that we need to look out for. We're organizers. Another thing that she talked about was the need to build popular support amongst the people before people engage in revolutionary action. And too often that does not happen. Too often, a lot of times, these groups don't embrace all the issues that the people are genuinely concerned about. They don't make themselves appealing to the masses of the people. And that's something that she cautioned people about in this book. Cautioned them about the need to work for the people, a need to be recognized and respected by the people by embracing the things that are important to the masses of the people. So yeah, so this is a great book. Again, it's Assata, and I encourage you all to read this book. And I also encourage you all, again, to like our Facebook page, Reading as Activism, and join our discussions. The next book that we will be discussing is The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. And that's going to be the last Saturday in January. So I hope to see you there. With that, I want to say peace and blessings. Please rate, comment, subscribe, like the video, share the video, hit that notification bell so that you'll know when I post new content on here. Peace and blessings, everyone. Have a good evening.